Hello everyone, and welcome back to the next panel session that we have today. This is going to be focused on scaling bioprocessing techniques in the food industry. And just a quick reminder for those of you who are joining us for the first time or coming back from other sessions, we like all of the panel discussions to be interactive. So feel free to ask any questions or share any comments or thoughts in the live discussion box, which you can find at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. I will hand over swiftly to our moderator for this session, which is Zach Weston from the Good Food Institute. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you, Jade, and hello to everyone. Thank you for joining us today to have this panel on a really interesting set of topics with a very fascinating slate of speakers who'll be weighing in on both the questions that we prepared in advance, as well as your questions for the remainder of the session. So I'd like to have them introduce themselves. I'll briefly start. Zach Weston with the Good Food Institute, a supply chain manager. The Good Food Institute is focused on creating a healthy, just, and sustainable food system. We do that by trying to serve as a catalyst and field builder within the alternative protein technologies of plant-based proteins, fermentation-derived proteins, and cell culture cultivated technologies. With that, let's turn it over to our panelists. I'd like them each to introduce themselves and the company that they're representing by just taking a couple of sentences to describe the problems and the biggest challenges that their companies are trying to solve in their approach to solving those challenges. And we'll go in the order of Eyal, Sunil, Ernst, and Ranjan. So Eyal, start with you.
Hello, yes, Eyal Rivlin, VP Production and Operations at Aleph Farm, executing the company's goal of commercialization, taking the company from an R&D stage to a full commercial company, building, designing, building the facilities from R&D to pilot scale, mid-scale, full scale, and building the supply chain capabilities in order to reach the global expansion of our plans for the future. Aleph Farms is a cultivated meat company that is driving to produce to inclusive transition of the meat industry to a more sustainable and resilient food system. We grow beef steaks without harming animals, without slaughtering animals, and in a much more resilient and sustainable way. The company was founded in 2017 by Didier Toubier, the Strauss incubator in Israel, and Shulamit Levenberg from the Technion Technological Institute of Technology. And the company vision is to enable a high level of nutrition and proteins to the world, anytime, anywhere, any place. Regarding our challenges, Aleph Farms is now building the capabilities from R&D to full scale. The challenges we see on this time is one, scaling up fast and economically, and secondly, the getting eventually to cost parity, reducing capex, and improving our process from utilization of the cells and serve, and building and reducing the cost of the media through the process.
Sunil, the CTO of Perfect Day. I've been with Perfect Day for about close to 2.5 years now. Perfect Day as an organization is mainly or primarily an alternate protein company focused on dairy proteins. Having said that, we are not averse to looking at other proteins in the alternate food ecosystem. What does PD do on a daily basis? We hope to create a more equitable and sustainable food ecosystem, a tasty one at that, for all of us, at the same time ensuring that the process is not changed. It's to ensure that we have a kinder and greener future, make sure that folks get to eat what they like to eat without compromising the environment. In short, we want to have a very minimal environmental footprint while giving to the world the same amount of healthy food. Challenges, the challenges are very many. They seem to be increasing as times progress and as time progresses. But as a startup company, the kind of challenges that we faced are very different from the challenges that we're facing right now. I would elaborate more on that in the subsequent talk. Thank you.
Very good. Let me go next, Zach. So my name is Ernst Orssam. First of all, very pleased to be here in this panel. Great group. So I'm leading Roslin Technologies here in Edinburgh in Scotland. And what we do is we focus on cells for cultivated meat. As everyone knows, cultivated meat starts with cells. And we believe to make this industry viable, you need to have cells that replicate forever, they grow efficiently, and they grow fast. The reality is that many organizations in the industry that currently use cells today, they don't have cells that fulfill all those criteria. And that's where we come in. We use a certain technique called induced pluripotent stem cells that we use to introduce, to make these cells replicate forever. And that is what we're focusing on. Unlike my other panelists here, we have made actually a strategic choice not to become a cultivated meat producer ourselves, but actually focus on making those cells available to the whole industry with two reasons. One, we just want to focus on what we're good at, but also we want to make sure that we can help the industry as a whole to get to mass market faster and cheaper. So that's our goal. Happy to be on this panel.
Yeah, I can go next. My name is Ranjan Patnaik, and I'm the CTO of the Every company that used to be called Clara Foods until recently. And our main focus has been mainly to use the fermentation platform, which is well known in the industry for ages and decades, to make environmentally friendly products from bioresources. And we are targeting specifically animal proteins to be made using our platform, with the initial focus being to replace the egg white that is so ubiquitous around and derives from chicken. We want to exactly replicate the same products at the same price points and at the same scale, but obviously without using any chickens or animal agriculture in the picture. And our main challenges, I would say right now at this stage, consistent with any new technology, is scale and capacity. We want to make food accessible at a price point that it is there for sustainably to replace the actual animal product in the ecosystem. And that's what we are now trying to do by leveraging knowledge across the board, both historical knowledges in the industry and plus partnering with various partners to make sure that these challenges are not just addressed by us, but also addressed as an ecosystem so that these solutions are leveraged across platforms for a variety of industries that are trying to make animal proteins using precision fermentation.
Great. Thank you all for those introductions. Now let's dive into the content, and you each in different ways alluded to some of the challenges that you're each trying to solve. I want to really focus in for each of you on 1 to 2 specific technical challenges you're seeing when we think about scaling this system up. And I want to go a little bit deeper too by sort of asking you to talk a little bit about some of the solution pathways, the types of research or exploration or partnerships, external groups you're working with, anything that you seems particularly promising areas of exploration as you think about these key challenges. So Sunil, if it's all right, if we can start with you, and then we'll move to each of our panelists in turn.
Absolutely. Thanks, Zach. So first, pardon me for not thanking you. It's a wonderful opportunity to be here and talk to all of you and learn from all of you too. So the challenges, as I mentioned before, have been kind of stage specific. Perfect Day faced a huge challenge initially when we just came into market, or even before we came into the market, when we came into this field about 6 to 7 years back. So part of the challenge, major challenge at that point in time, was to make a sample protein which would be converted into a final milk product, which is, as Ranjan said, I mean, we too are a fermentation-based company, so it would be very obvious that we would have several impurities associated with our protein. So getting rid of those impurities and creating a sample which folks are willing to even test was one of the major challenges. And once we got past that initial challenge, which most startups are bound to face, then the kind of challenges were diverse. They were at a totally different scale. And to use the same word again, scale was, of course, the next obvious challenge. So sample accepted, we were asked to say, okay, you have made milligrams levels of proteins or gram levels of proteins. Can you translate that into, say, ton scale and show that your process is actually a scalable process? And that is a very daunting challenge. It's not a linear translation of a technology. And that was one of the biggest and the most daunting of challenges that we faced. One, I'll go sequentially. One is to get a base strain that you are very comfortable working with. And strains could be prokaryotic and eukaryotic strains. And regardless, they would produce proteins. But you want a protein which is functional, which is structurally similar to your final protein. And you want a protein which is devoid, a strain which is devoid of toxins. And where do you get this dream strain from? So obviously, none of them are there around. You need to engineer them. You need to knock off certain proteins. You need to knock in certain proteins. So at each stage, the challenges are very many. Base strain selection, engineering that base strain is one of the major problems. Is your strain scalable? That again is a problem you need to address very early on in your product development portfolio. Next is your fermentation process. So it's a totally different ball game when you deal with 2-liter fermenters or 500 ml fermenters. And when you multiply that 1,000 times and you're talking about 400,000 liter fermenters, it's a totally different ball game. So you need to have technical expertise. You need to have manpower. One of the biggest challenges that the industry is facing, and especially find a greener future where you can recycle the water and you can recycle several of your ingredients. So recycling technology as well as transferring technology, recycling raw materials and transferring technology is one of the major challenges. The third major challenge is your analytics. If you do not have a proper analytical team with precision as your major criteria, then you're bound to fail as you go down towards your product development, because you do not want to have your protein fail you when you're creating your final product. So, and when you, as I mentioned before, when you scale up, you'll suddenly find new impurities creeping up as we did. And with these impurities impacting your final product significantly, you were not ready for it very early on because you did not have a proper analytical tool. So analytics, again, at a very early stage is a critical component that most folks don't really take into account. The final technical challenge that most folks face is compatibility with your final food product. So oftentimes you have the most pure and functionally active protein, but you tend to find that it's simply not compatible with the other ingredients which you have to use to create a final food product. So all these components need to be thought of very early on, even before you start working on a protein or a cell component.
Thanks, Sunil. Ernst, you want to go next?
Yeah, let me, and I want to build on Sunil in a little bit as well, but I see kind of two challenges. The first one is kind of for cultivated meat, right? It's all about media cost reduction at the moment. There's many challenges, but that's a major one. And there's a tremendous amount of work going on by cultivated meat producers, media players to bring down that cost of media. There's a second way of how you can look at that in our view, and that is look at the cells themselves. How good are the cells in converting that media into cell mass, right? Muscle cells or fat cells. And the metabolic potential from the cell, in my view, is something that is quite often overlooked about how you can continuously improve that. Because if you look at parallel industries like livestock genetics, where I came from, that was one of the major drivers of productivity in livestock. And I believe you can bring that same idea and the same thinking to cells for cultivated meat as well. And that's where we as Roslin Technologies, that's where we focus on. So cells and media are two key components of cultivated meat. There's bioprocessing, there's scaffolding, etc. And then that leads me to the second big challenge for the industry, and that's also one for us. And that comes back to what Sunil said about compatibility. So many players in the industry are now currently focused on their piece of the value chain or their specific IP and their technology. In the end, if we want to become a kind of a commodity industry and want to compete with traditional meat, we need to bring down the cost of production. And with all the customization that's going on, I think that's a challenge. So need to find as an industry a way of how to make the different technologies compatible. And I think that is a key challenge where industry has to come together, and that's sometimes more pre-competitive than it should be competitive.
Great. And then Ranjan, Eyal, anything you'd like to talk about, your key challenges and solution pathways that you're excited to see explored more?
Absolutely. I think, as Sunil mentioned, that really in the fermentation space is such an old technology that people have been using for generations. And I would say insulin was the first animal product in that sense, which is actually made by precision fermentations and literally commoditized worldwide. So therefore, our approach has always been to make process technology as dummified, as simplistic, as portable, and as off the shelf. And we have taken that advantage of that. But as a smaller company coming out, it is difficult for us to build all this know-how in one place within our own control. So we have been partnering with the world's best in their own business, and we are getting our strained technology, our product know-how into the marketplace through them. And that has been working pretty well. But obviously, as we scale, the number of players and the stakeholders, the collaborations and the partnerships has to become even stronger and work like a well-oiled machine. And in that respect, I would say our technology scale up, we are doing pretty well. We are making very good amount of material. It is behaving the way we would like to. But at the same time, we are always trying to extract more information, both physiological strain information, data from process unit operations, and ensuring constantly our techno-economic model will not give us a surprise down the line. So we're constantly, I would say, the challenge for us to ensure that our scale down experiments and our projections to scale up is actually validated, and validated both by the market, by the product team, but more importantly for me, from the technology perspective. And therefore, that's one area. And I would also say the second one for technology us is what is the next generation of technologies that would further disrupt the cost structure of these proteins. And so we are constantly evaluating new process operations that might disrupt dramatically, not optimizing it, but dramatically disrupt that process. But then how do you validate those again? You need a scale up of new technology places where we could go and validate this new technology. So that's another area where we are finding, I would say, know-how gaps for next generation of technologies that might be required.
Thank you, Ranjan. I would go back to what Ernst said, and I would frame it in one area. For Aleph Farms, the main challenge is the scale up. We've already defined our animal-free growth media. We've defined our cell line. Now we have to see how we take this and grow this to the next level of scaling up for commoditization and mass production of our product. In order to do that, we are working with the leading suppliers of the growth media globally. We're actually almost educating them and trying to convince them to work with us and enlarge their capacity in order to supply ours. And it's not just ours. We are telling them we might be one of the first of the companies that are doing it, but eventually a lot will come. And by you scaling up your capabilities, it will help us and the whole industry to advance the capabilities and reduce costs eventually. And the second area is maybe we'll talk about it in the next phase, is the equipment. We know that in order to reduce costs, we have to scale up the equipment and produce more products from every batch. In order to do that, we need larger bioreactors, larger stir tanks, larger media tanks. Some of them are available out there, but some of them are still in the highest level of bioreactors that the industry knows, and we have to work with them. We're working with them together to define a business model in which we produce large sizes, large quantity, and fast equipment, and eventually reduce the cost by us enabling them to the suppliers to produce more in a bit lower cost, and that's a way to reduce capex. So scaling up is the main challenge, almost in every area of the cultured meat space.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense, and thank you all for those responses. Next question is, our set of questions is really about solving collective action problems. I know we've raised a lot of interesting themes in your answers to these initial opening questions, so please feel free to harken back to those or respond to those as you're thinking about some of these other themes that I'd like to explore next. The first one is, and we've heard this said multiple times, both in this panel, other panels, and really across a lot of different events, is the need for collaboration. But it's really challenging to do that, and I want to drill a little bit deeper below the surface than typical here. How do we actually start sharing things that are sort of sensitive intellectual property? Where are the areas where we can actually collaborate, and where are the areas where there's a strong need for secrecy, where we probably shouldn't even bother, at least for right now? And are there any mechanisms for sharing information and collaborating that you see either from other sectors or in this sector that are really effective, where there's enough trust built that you can actually make effective progress in partnerships? So this is for all panelists. I'm hoping we can start with you, Ernst, and then move to the rest of our panelists. But how do we collaborate, and what areas are likely to be pre-competitive, and things we can work on, and what areas are likely to be very protected and secret?
First of all, I think, and because Roslin Technologies is slightly different than the other panelists, right? Because we actually are an enabling technology, and so we actually share all our technology with everybody in the industry. So of course we protect it with IP, and we want to make money so we can reinvest it in better cells. But we already try to overcome that, at least on the expertise that we have. I think there's a couple of other things that are clearly pre-competitive for anybody in our space, right? That's regulatory frameworks. Every jurisdiction is doing that differently, which is incredibly challenging long term. It's fine for now, given the fact that only one country approved a cultivated meat product. But more can be done. There's similar for consumer acceptance, which I think is valid for all the alternative proteins that we talk about today. I think one of the things that I find challenging and to see is when we work with different cultivated meat companies, some have some unique bioprocessing technology. Others have a fantastic differentiation protocol that is proprietary and unique. I think if you can combine that, you can be really a powerful industry. I don't know if there's opportunities for cross-licensing or how far that is being explored, and maybe some of the other panelists can give some of their perspectives on that. But I think there's an opportunity as an industry to go down the cost curve faster if we kind of share that. Because I take actually fairly simple view on this whole industry. I don't think that Aleph farms is competing with Upside or with Meatball, etc., because this industry is going to be supply constrained for the next decade and maybe two, right? I think before we really start competing for consumer demand, we're several years out. So I think it's more about how do you work pre-competitively and making sure that if you invent something that you get some returns for that. I think that's probably more important than trying to kind of hoard it up and sit on it. That would be at least my perspective.
Thanks.
I'm curious if there's from the other panelists, if there's kind of a view on how would you look at sharing IPs as something that is acceptable, or what under what conditions is that doable, realizing that you don't want to give away inventions, because that's clearly not in anybody's interest.
I think I can give an example of, again, the media development. In the media space, the industry in whole has to work with the suppliers in order to enable them to produce more of the media and reduce the cost by increasing their output. There is a balance here between the proprietary part of the media development and the let's call it the regular part of the basic media that is relatively known to the industry. So part of it, of course, we can share and enable the suppliers to, in order for the suppliers to reduce the cost as much as we need for Aleph farms, we will enable, or we are, it's okay from our side that the suppliers will supply these products to other companies, because that's the only way for them to reduce the cost. On the other hand, of course, there are the specific developments per company, per product that will be still protected under IP, because each company is developing their own, at least media that grows best with their sales, of course. But this is the cultivated meat is an industry working with the media suppliers in order to enable them to scale up, and by that, reducing the cost for the whole industry.
I think that's an excellent example.
Yeah, and I can comment on the fermentation side of things again as to what would be the crown jewel of a company versus what can be shared. That differentiation has always been there, and rightly so. It's like software and hardware, right? So I think as far as the strain engineering, the know-how, the catalyst, and maintaining certain trade secret formulations to keep the functionality of these animal proteins equivalent to the natural proteins will continue to be the crown jewels of the company, that I feel. But in terms of sharing and scaling and accessibility, the ecosystem has to develop together. Capacity building, competency building, human resources building, supply chains, regulatory framework. I think that entire piece has been very well done by certain other sectors in the industry. The semiconductor or any other industry infancy you see, that's the natural evolution. And for all of us to succeed, and obviously in our partnership, as you can say, we fundamentally believe in connect and collaborate. We have been working in collaboration with strong industry innovators of ingredients like Ingredient to help us access the markets, the distribution, understand the applications. And on the back end, we also have been working with, again, industry leaders who are stalwarts in that entire competency with spin-offs from Anheuser-Busch called BioBrew. There are massive fermentation companies who have been operating in this field for so long. So I strongly believe that exactly identifying the win-win collaborations and relationships and where in the value chains the competency is coming in would help us all develop products at price points that is competitive, but also sustainable, because every new technology has a certain number of years. We all have to make sure that these ecosystems are keeping up and everybody's getting a chance to run their car in a highway. And I always look at everybody likes the trim of their own car, but the highway is the common. Every car has to go through the same highway. So I think this industry is evolving that way, and we are very happy at the every company taking that model to fruition. We of course have a lot of other academic collaborations because knowledge has to continue increasing. And I don't think intellectual property is an issue as long as we are very clear on our business models and aspirations of the company. As long as that is there, intellectual property is actually good. It helps us figure out how to collaborate.
Sunil, did you want to jump on this one? If not, we can move to the next question. Oh, can't hear you, unfortunately.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Very quickly, I heard every single panelist here raised fantastic points, and Ranjan ended it with a fantastic point, which indicates that, yeah, IP is of value and folks need to protect the IP, but the highway is something which all of us need to use, and that needs to be acknowledged in this field. Else, the big boys, if I may, are smacking their lips. They're really eagerly waiting to see how far the innovators in this space are going to go before they make their move. So that's something which I completely agree with you, Ranjan. IP is important, but the highway has to be a common thing. And if the current players in the food industry do not look out for each other, I do not think it's good for the industry as a whole. That's my opinion, Zach.
Absolutely. Well, let's turn to a audience question actually that just came in and that addresses one of those shared highways, if you will, one of those things that we have in common that probably represents an easier area for collaboration pre-competitively, and that's the regulatory side of things. This question says, can you discuss, this question says, can the panel comment on the regulatory and GMP, good manufacturing practices, position of these technologies, particularly at scale? So I'll be open to anyone who wants to talk about that. It probably would be helpful to discuss what the current status is of that, and then also any desired future world states that that you all would like to see from a regulatory and GMP standpoint.
I can comment on that from Aleph Farm's view. First of all, it's good to connect it with the previous question. Talking about regulatory, we as an industry can collaborate together, and we are doing it in working with regulatory agencies in order to exactly figure out these questions about GMP position and technologies in the cultivated meat sector. I can tell you from our experience in Aleph Farm that we get very good cooperation from regulatory agencies, in which we have a mutual discussion about our technology, our challenges, our scaling plans, and we have a good feedback with the agencies, if it is in Singapore, Southeast Asia, in the US, and we are even here in Israel trying to figure out together how to evaluate these activities. And when you look at it relatively straightforward, we have a relatively good guidance, at least from the US. The US says all up to harvesting is FDA, and all the downstream, of final packaging, labeling, storage, and distribution is USDA. So when we try to think about what goes where, this is how we get the guidance of how to work with it. But the regulatory agencies understand that this is a new industry, and there is a collaborative approach and mutual understanding that we have to understand together how to deal with this. And it's a back and forth discussion about how eventually will regulatory take it. But from our experience, a lot of countries are very open to this discussion, asking us questions, trying to get from us how do we see this, and this regulatory pathway of regulation and GMP will build itself together between the industry and the regulatory agencies.
I would say for the fermentation, it's a relatively simpler and easier in that sense. Food products have been made by fermentation for so many ages. The regulatory framework in every geography is pretty good. In terms of building facility, what standards we need to make sure the safety aspects is maintained. There are various regulations and codes to manage, operate, and make products in this facility. And the supply chain, the raw material producers are also very well versed with that ecosystem. Now, as far as regarding the specific products that we make, and that is where a lot of diligence goes into making sure, at least in our case, we are looking at mimicking the same functionality as the natural protein. So that's the first way where we don't see much of an issue at all in terms of making a similar product that nature already has been using. The self-grass and the grass process that is very much well adapted in the US, at least, provides the right framework for all of us to ensure that what we are making is been thought through properly. So at least in that respect, I would say in North America, that has not been an issue. And I don't think that in other countries or other geographies, this will be an issue as more and more products go through the scale-up stages and further validations happens. And the good news here is that the Every company is not the only company. And Perfect Day and many other companies are already getting massive amounts of know-how, science behind this technology and the products. And once that knowledge base keeps on increasing, the academic research is going to just explode on that as well, creating essentially the same framework that I'm sure 40 years ago, people probably questioned the first biotech product at Genentech, human growth hormone. Imagine in those days, somebody would saying, I'm going to make a human growth hormone in a cell line in a stirred tank reactor. But today it's pretty much the baseline, the framework. So I don't think, therefore, it is a hurdle at all. It's in fact the right balance and the right checkpoints to make sure that we are sustainably developing these products and ecosystem.
Great. I'd like to move on to our next question. Are there any types of strategic partnerships that you think would be particularly advantageous for your companies over the next 5 years? Encouraging you to dream big here. What's the largest headache you have that you'd love to outsource to someone else? This will be, again, open to all of our panelists to address. So we'll start with maybe Ranjan, and then we can go to Ernst and whoever else would like to weigh in here.
Yeah, and I would say that my dream would be that if you have a fermenter, call us. So that would say we're welcoming you in open hands. And my dream here or thing is that the fermentation technology is well known, and yet there is scarcity in general. So, and our products are performing very well. We are at that economics where scale will make a big impact, and it'll be a mutually win-win scenario. And also the target markets and the addressable markets we're talking about, egg proteins, is just massive. So even if we replace a certain percentage of the supply chain of current chickens and eggs, one can imagine the opportunity. I don't think similar products exist with that level of capacity requirement. So it's a win-win, and then I would hope that more fermentation capacity comes into play.
Yeah, honestly, I would echo that for cultivated meat, right? It's all about first kind of technology-wise, we need to get the cost of production down, right? Because without that, we're not even getting close to having a meaningful conversation with the consumer. But I think on the backside of that, and we will get there as an industry, I think on the backside, having a concerted effort as an industry to get consumers on board, the regulators on board, I think there's a lot of potential. I think there's some big strategic collaborations across the industry possible. I've seen that in other industries. I think we can absolutely apply that here as well.
I would add to that strategic partnerships with current companies producing any kind of food that will take on board producing this kind of products in their area and supporting the initial investment in some kind of a joint venture will enable the rapid expansion of the technology, assuming, as Ernst said, that the scale up will be done and the cost parity will be reached. Having multiple joint venture with large companies that have the basis of the capex to invest in these kinds of projects and the know-how how to run these facilities will help the industry tremendously in expanding our capabilities, our capacities, in bringing these products to the whole world.
Zach, I'll quickly jump in and say I completely agree with all the panelists. But one of the biggest challenges that I know as an industry player we face is asking the right questions and at the right time. So that's something which will facilitate identifying your partners and identifying the appropriate technology that you need to bring in. So that's the only additional thing which I can bring in now.
Great. This next question comes from our audience and refers, I think, one of those things that maybe part of the process we would like better partners with or be able to outsource. The question is, do you think there needs to be an innovation around bioreactor hardware and the traditional CDMO, contract development and manufacturing organization, CDMO model, to help solve the bottleneck at the intersection of science and engineering? Any specific suggestions of what's needed? So innovations on the bioreactor side or the traditional CDMO model. Any of our panelists would like to weigh in on that from our audience?
I'll go in. So there is a lot of innovation happening in the bioreactor model. So it would suffice to say that this is something the industry is very actively working on. It's not only the industry, it's also the academic sector, which is looking into new bioreactor models. More and more folks are moving away from the steel bioreactors and going into the disposable ones or the single-use ones. That's one thing which I think the industry is looking forward and gearing up to accept. So in short, the CDMO model is not going to go in the near future, but innovation in the bioreactor space fully on. There are plenty of academic groups working on it, plenty of industries too working on it.
And the only thing I understand, Sunil, is exactly right. The disposable system, especially for the food industry, might be the other way to go to decentralized production too. The old traditional model of centralizing, that bigger the scale, is one model, but there is another distributed model about the microbreweries. You can always make smaller units, distribute it around, and that needs to be retested. These models were tested during the biofuels days, and I would say I'm more on the decentralized approach, but the legacy ecosystem is built around scale. Massive scale gives you cost reduction. That's what we are taught. But if you extend the scope of it, microbreweries still make profit. So there's a lot to be done in that sector. Fermenter design has not changed for 100 years. It's the circular thing. Somebody said it's circular, right? There's nothing, why should it be circular to begin with? And I think also perfusion cultures. There were many things in the mammalian cell culture in the initial pharmaceutical days by massive companies that have know-how about continuous systems. The production economy changes massively, switching from batch to production. The hardware around that and the ecosystem around integrating downstream processing with fermentation and making modular systems, revisit again. I'm not saying it might work right away, but it needs to be revisited because new technologies has come up, both digital technologies, sensor technology, a lot of things have come into the play that needs to be put back into the legacy fermentation hardware to see whether there are better modular systems to make. Somebody was saying we could parachute drop production systems to make vaccines if there is an emergency. And, and I said, yeah, why not? The same thing. I think there's a lot to be done there. And to Sunil's point, academia is working on it. There's a lot working on it. And that's where some of the funding from the agencies has to be geared towards this kind of research as well.
Great. Thank you for those responses. We're going to move on to this next question. When you're looking at the talent constraints you currently have for labor, for consultants, where are the gaps right now? What's the most needed category of folks that you're looking to hire, to recruit, to retain over the next couple of years? I will address this to everyone, but just ask you to keep it just short and brief. What are the top 1 to 2 things you're really looking to add to your organization from a talent perspective over the next couple of years?
I can just say, but I would like to have engineers who understand food science. So I need chemical engineers who understand what it takes to make food, not in terms of rheology and viscosity property, but actually using the terminology that the food scientists use, like texture. So that's what we're targeting about cross-disciplinary folks who understand the terminology across disciplines and are able to basically move products down the line.
I can say that we're looking for any staffing that is, as Ranjan said, that knows biology. If it's biotech engineers, if it's cell culture biologists, if it's even operators that have dealt with bioreactors or biotechnology processes. So the whole area of biological knowledge within the staffing, this is the area that we see the biggest gap in recruitment and the largest requirements for coming years. And at least in Israel, for some reason, the number of people that are learning this area is not as high as the industry requires.
Yeah, so when we look at people, we like to hire, and specifically here scientists, right? Somebody that needs to come to our business and that wants to really bring something unique that we don't have today and makes us think differently. Somebody that cares about what we try to achieve and that wants to work hard to make that come true. And if you fulfill those 3 criteria, then I'm sure that it can be quite successful.
nothing more to add, Zach. I concur with what they said. Yeah.
Great. All right. This is our probably the last question we'll be able to get from the audience, just for the sake of time, and hopefully a chance for some fun stories. So this is a safe space. What are some of the biggest mistakes you might have made during the scale up of fermentation processes? I'll extend that, of course, to cultivated. Any just very brief mistakes that were made that might be able to share to help others.
I will confess something that I don't know if it's a mistake now or not, but obviously we'll do it differently. We often take a very aggressive approach, bypassing piloting and answering the last question of scale up before do. But there is always something to be done. So we have jumped some what I would call traditional engineering approaches to scale up. And in some cases, it has helped us quite a bit. We were like, wow, we bypassed the entire middle phase and got products out, thanks to my boss. But at the same time, there are places where we think, well, we should have slowed down and done a little bit more traditional way that we were taught. So that's the fine balance. And the best way to do is getting in consultation with many people. Your own organization, your biggest critics outside, ecosystem players, vendors, and that conversation could have probably helped us a little bit.
Perfectly, I think we've made more mistakes than we've had success stories. So yeah, I'll maybe relate one of them. So one of the common mistakes we used to make in the past is to approach CDMOs, and given that we were working on a shoestring budget, we were working with folks who would give us the best deal, only to find out that the fermenters had a totally different specification with regards to impeller design and whatever. And we, as Ranjan said, we bypassed the pilot scale, went straight in, only to find that the bugs did not grow, or if they grew, they just did not produce the protein. So a lot of aspirations of bypassing the pilot thing is something which is one of the common mistakes we make. And when you go to a CDMO, oftentimes you will always find that one CDMO does have a totally different vessel compared to the other CDMO. So you need to have experts go in, visit, audit the facility before you actually sign the deal. So those are things which we learned, and we made mistakes and learned the hard way though.
Great. Well, thank you for those responses. This is going to be our closing question, and it's going to be sort of a reflection as well as a call to action I'll ask for each of you briefly. So the first reflection is, what excites you about the future? What are you looking forward to over the next couple of years? And the call to action would be, what ask do you have for our audience? What would you like them to be working on? What do you wish existed that doesn't? What advice do you have? So we'll go ahead and close with this question for each of you. And if we can start with you, Ernst, and then move to the rest of our panelists.
Okay. So first of all, I have to admit I'm not very good at looking in the future, Zach. But let me actually look briefly at the past, right? So I'm here sitting at the Roslin Institute, and for people that remember this from the past, in 1996, exactly 25 years ago, Dolly the sheep was born here in this area. So that was the first animal that was cloned from an adult cell. At that time, there was a major biotechnology breakthrough, right? On one end, it was incredibly exciting what you could do with technology, but also somewhat scary about what are people going to do with it. I don't think that anybody at that moment could have foreseen that that same type of technology you would use today for making cultivated meat and grow straight from an adult cell into a piece of lamb, right? Like lamb meat, but then without ever seeing a live animal. So I find it just fascinating to see where technology came from and where it goes. So what it then looks like in 25 years, honestly, I have no idea, but it would be fantastic if cultivated meat and the alternatives that Ranjan and Sunil are preparing, that is ubiquitous everywhere. Personally, there's quite a few friends of mine that do home brewery. I would love to see if there's in the supermarket, if that still exists, then you have kind of small packages, do it yourself, grow your own meat kit with a few of the Roslin technology cells, some of the technologies from my colleagues here on the panel, and that you can do it at home. That sounds pretty cool.
Thanks, Ernst. Let's go next to Eyal.
Yes, so one of the exciting things that I can see, we are now in the second week of COP26, which talks about Earth sustainability, and one of the goals is to reduce the temperature increase of in 1.5 degrees in the coming years. If our industry will help in this area, I think we will give a very big impact to humanity only by doing this. Other areas are, of course, supplying meat to the whole world, wherever you can grow cattle or cannot grow cattle, because we will not replace regular meat, we will be in addition to that. So if we can help in the food constraint, the global food constraint that is predicted in 20-30 years, that will be a great thing. And maybe an exciting thing that is a bit part of the dream, and at least part of Aleph Farm's dream, is to enable to produce meat and healthy nutrition outside of Earth, looking at our space plan and the conquering the moon and Mars, and our technology, this industry technology can enable sourcing and supplying food even outside of Earth, after, of course, supplying whatever needed for our planet.
Thank you for that. Ranjan?
Yeah, I would say that, I didn't realize that the food that we are taking to live is actually destroying the planet today. The planet is hurting today. So in my little world, about if we can just make a simple dent by replacing the egg in a near, as long as I'm alive, and I could see that people are buying our products or anybody else's products for that matter, to replace the consumption pattern that is counting on animal agriculture that is happening right now in our own planet. So if we can make a small dent to that, I think that would be so satisfying personally. And maybe we talk in 10 years again or 2 years again, and the things are moving.
Absolutely. Zach, my 2 points. One, to add to the points that the other panelists have raised. One, I hope to see more government buy-in to this mindset. This is, as Eyal also mentioned, the food ecosystem being or negatively impacting the climate has to be something that has to be acknowledged by governments across. And that is something which I hope will happen soon. This will facilitate more grants, which in turn facilitate cutting edge science. The second point, which I hope, as Ranjan said, I will live to see, is data sharing. So data, the amount of data which the industry is churning out is again in pockets. So if there is a way to pull all these data together, the day is not far when you have a bug, you know exactly what the processes to use for that bug, which media to use for that bug, what to do under what conditions. So in short, without sounding too ambitious, artificial intelligence using the data that is being churned out and wasted on just worked on in silos is something which I hope will be shattered and people can share data.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for your visions of the future and also the work you are doing in the present. I'm sure I speak for our audience when we say we're very grateful and very much enjoyed listening to this conversation. And I'll also address to our audience a big thank you as well from our panel. Thank you for all that you do to advance this space, because it truly takes an enormous community to pull off what we're trying to accomplish. So with that, I believe I'll turn it over to the host and we'll conclude this session. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jax.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Wonderful meeting all of you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Zach, for that great moderation, and to all our panelists for that great discussion. And really interesting to see all your questions from the audience for our panelists to address. It's great to get that interactive discussion going. So we will have our next kind of scaling focus session starting in just under 5 minutes, which is looking at the importance of food science and food design. So that'll be hosted by Motive. So feel free to grab a quick drink and join us again in just under 5 minutes. And thank you again to our panelists and Zach for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're no longer live. Thank you, everyone. It was a really good, really interesting discussion. I thought we've got some good questions coming in. It's good.
It's wonderful meeting and talking to all. Thank you so much.
Yeah, perfect.
And thanks, Jack, for not making us nervous. Thanks. I think the questions were pretty easily paced and everybody built on each other's thing. It was good.
No, well done, Zach. Well prepared, and appreciate the thought that you put in it.
Absolutely. We're very excited to see and hear about everything you all are doing. So yeah, the best of luck to each and every one of you.
Should get you might challenge us and then it becomes difficult.
Yes.
Sometimes some moderators would challenge before the audience challenges, and you didn't do that. So
But Ranjan, I think you said it right. Is pick up on the opportunity in 2 years and look back on where we came from. See what it is.
No, absolutely. I think yeah, it would be good to meet again and see what things are.
Certainly.
Yep.
Hopefully over a meal that features all of our all the different products that we're all working on. So can't wait.
It should be it should be in San Francisco, not London, though. Jay.
I mean, yeah, that's definitely something I could definitely work on. But yeah, I was about to say the same. Hopefully, in 2 years' time, in person around a proper table would be nice for sure. So yeah, definitely working it. And yeah, San Francisco, that's easy enough to do. That was on my list. Potentially for next year, I'm thinking European, but thinking the Netherlands. And then the year after was the plan for the US. So yeah, it's on the radar. So don't worry.
I'll take the Netherlands. Still hold a passport, but I haven't been there for 2 years. So
yeah. Okay. Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you for inviting us, Jade. Really appreciate it. Nice to meet you.
And I hope you were able to catch some of the other sessions that we have today and some of the showcase and stuff. So but yeah, I'll touch base by email, but really appreciate you all joining. That's a great panel. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Bye bye.
All right, bye.